This tutorial shows you how to paint a simple watercolor still life with some underpainting techniques. So hello and welcome to Run My Art watercolor tutorial series. I have pre-sketched a simple apple sketch with another slice of apple for the painting, and the sketch link, if you'd like to download the sketch, the link is in the description. And I am not going to discuss too much about the theories of underpainting. As you witness the painting process, you will be able to understand for yourself how the underpainting works in watercolor. So to kickstart, I am going to paint this wet on wet, and as you can see here, I am pre-wetting the entire painting area, including the apple sketch, with some clean water. And the first color that I'm going to drop is Indian yellow, as it adds some brightness, especially in underpainting. And assuming that the light source is coming from the left hand side, I am dropping in the yellow paint mix mostly onto the left hand side of the painting. And why on the apple is because I want the apple to look much brighter later on when I make more changes. So usually we'll be focusing on the subject matter of the painting. In this case will be the apples, and then later on we'll be painting the background. But in this case, since we are going to use the underpainting techniques, I thought it would be easier if I apply the paints at one go, as I paint both the subject as well as the background. So the second color you can notice here is a deep blue shade. I am using a sapphire blue. You can use an ultramarine. So as I mentioned earlier, the light source is coming from the left hand side, so I foresee the right hand side to be in a much more deeper tone, which is why I use the blue as the underpainting. So for the subject, I am already painting the apple at the back using a permanent carmine. And as I paint this, the painting surface is still wet because of the underpainting. So basically it's a wet on wet painting method. So underpainting technique has been a hot topic or in the trend in the last few years for watercolor, but actually it has been around for decades probably, where it was first introduced in oil painting and then followed by acrylic, and now the watercolor. In fact, 10 years ago when I started learning painting watercolor, I learned using the underpainting technique. So this is how the painting looks like once it's dried, and I have replaced my masking tape. So the paint spatters is just to create some fun element in watercolor painting. So if you do not prefer to make these spatters, it's totally fine. So we'll move on to the second layer painting, and I'm going to kickstart painting the sliced apple, and this time I'm painting it wet on dry. So basically it's wet paint on dry surface, and once again I'm using the permanent carmine, and with the tip of my brush I'm just trying to paint all those narrow areas as well as fine line. Just showing you from another angle the process of painting using the tip of the brush. So if you don't have a round brush with a narrow tip, you can try to use rigger brush just for this particular painting task. Now for the sliced apple, where the surface is colorless, usually they are a bit oxidized when it's exposed to the air. So I'm just pre-wetting it before I make some stains on this area. So just pre-wet the sketch with some clean water. And the color that I'm dropping here is yellow ochre, since it has a brownish hint in it and less bright. So just dropping it onto the common areas where you see all these stains on a sliced apple. And as soon as I've stained the wet area with this paint mix, I'm going to give them light washes with a damp brush. So make sure your brush is not soaked wet but just damp, and just give it some light washes so that it looks more realistic, as in how an oxidized sliced apple looks like. So once the painting is dry, just dropping in some burnt sienna for the seed on the apple and other minor details on the sliced apple. Extending the same burnt sienna paint onto the apple's stem. Next, I'm going to paint the red apple, also using the wet on dry technique. And I am using the same permanent carmine that I used to paint the first layer. So basically, when you apply the underpainting technique on your still life painting especially, it is best to extend the underpainting technique also onto the background or the surrounding of the painting. Otherwise, it may look quite obvious where the subject matter or the still life does not correspond with its surroundings. So it's important to apply the underpainting technique onto both the still life as well as its background. So basically, the bright color, as in yellow, represents the lighter area or brighter area of a painting, while the blue shade represents the darker area or shade in a painting. Like I mentioned earlier, the light source in this painting comes from the left hand side. So the yellow paint helps to maintain the brighter part of the painting, while the blue painting helps to preserve the darker part of the painting, as in further from the light source. And as for the red apple painting, I have applied a little bit of ruby red, which is of a darker shade, slightly darker than the permanent carmine that I applied earlier, simply because this apple is away from the light source compared to the sliced apple, plus it is also being overshadowed by the sliced apple. So this part of the apple painting could appear a bit darker. So with the help of the underpainting earlier as well as the darker red shade, it helps to maintain this dark tone of the red apple. Over here, I have also mixed a little bit of the sapphire in the red mix, which consists of the permanent carmine and ruby, to make it even more darker in order to show the casted shadow of the sliced apple. Also extending the dark red mix towards the left hand corner of the red apple, since this part of the apple is definitely the furthest from the light source, so it would appear much darker. Now I'm just using the clean damp brush to just soften some of those areas that require some light washes from the dark paint application. Alright, time for some fine-tuned details, and I'm using a smaller brush to paint on the seeds. And I'm using the sapphire shade. You can use burnt umber in order to paint all those dark parts on the seed and other minor details. Now extending the same sapphire paint onto the stem of both the apples. Alright, time to paint the background. So I'm going to use the wet on wet technique. Therefore, please pre-wet the background area with some clean water. And the first shade is a mix of burnt sienna as well as sapphire or burnt umber. So it results in a darker brown shade. And as soon as I start painting the bottom half of this still life painting, you will notice that the brown shade appears much brighter on the left hand side, while it appears a bit dull on the right hand side. So this is quite evident as in how the underpainting works. So the blue shade has helped to create a darker tonal value, while the yellow shade or any brighter shade creates a brighter tonal value. So this is how underpainting works. As for the top half of the painting, I am using olive green yellowish. Same observation as I paint, you will notice that the right hand side always appears much darker than the left hand side as I start layering them with another paint shade. So if you have decided to apply the underpainting techniques, then you will have to predetermine the light source of your painting, as in where is the light coming from. Is it coming from the top, the left, or the right hand side? So this will help you to decide in the early stages of the painting where would you want to apply those dark and light shades for your underpainting. Alright, this is the result of the completely dry painting, and as you observe, even after the painting is dry, you can still distinguish between the bright and dark areas of the painting. So basically the underpainting technique helps you to achieve the tonal values very effectively, especially in still life painting where you would want to see strong characters and tonal values. I personally feel that the beauty in still life painting always comes from the tonal values instead of those fine details. So even if you don't put much effort to paint all those fine details on your still life, the underpainting would do more justice to your painting. Just showing you a quick glance to distinguish between both the sides by placing the brush in the middle. I'm sure you could notice a vast difference. So try this underpainting technique. It definitely elevates the entire painting. So it's not just the still life, it also applies to the background. Next, I'm going to paint the casted shadow onto the apple surface as well as the foreground. So once again, I am just pre-wetting those areas lightly with a damp brush, and then I'm going to drop in a mix of grey with a hint of sapphire. So you can use a ready-made grey shade if you have one. Otherwise, you can mix burnt sienna with a deep blue as in sapphire blue or ultramarine. You will arrive at a cool grey, and then with a little bit of sapphire or burnt umber will arrive at this brownish grey shade, which will correspond well to the foreground, which has a brown hint. So usually I will use just the cool grey for shadow, but this time, since the foreground as in a table has a brownish hint, which is why I decided to mix in a hint of sapphire. Softening the edges with a clean damp brush. Over here I am just repainting the seed with the same sapphire paint, since the earlier paint has faded, and also extending some more details, some minor details. So I just thought of creating some marks on the red apple surface, since apples has got these tiny dots. Of course, not all apple types has got these marks, but if you intend to do this, just lift out some pigment by brushing your damp brush the ones with the smaller bristle in order to achieve these small polka dot like marks. Just lift them out by pressing a clean paper towel onto it. For some even brighter highlights or popping highlights, I have used white gouache and applying that onto some part of the painting, especially onto the seed and stem. So I just noticed that the sliced apple needed one last adjustment, which is on the seed area, where it's supposed to have a hollow area where the seed capsule sits. So I've used a light wash of yellow ochre, just lightly painting that area. And I've also extended that light yellow ochre wash onto the second apple, where it's supposed to appear slightly brighter, just a minor adjustment. And the painting is complete. So, did you like this overall underpainting technique applied for this watercolor still life? So I wish you would try it out and see it for yourself. Sometimes the screen doesn't do much justice. So experiment it, paint more, and you will realize how much the underpainting technique benefits. So if you like this tutorial, don't forget to hit the like and share button, and do subscribe to my channel. I'll see you in another tutorial. Bye.